Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the US presidential election. I'm Sarah Coates.
And I'm Tom Burgess-Watson. You're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya News headquarters. Coming up on today's programme.
So I want to thank the American people for the extraordinary honor of being elected your 47th president and your 45th president.
Donald Trump wins the US presidential election, defeating Kamala Harris in a stunning political comeback.
Donald Trump thanks his supporters at a viewing party in Florida, describing his re-election as the greatest political movement of all time.
Donald Trump has received 279 of the 538 Electoral College votes as things currently stand, whilst Republicans have regained control of the Senate.
Welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us.
It's been quite an extraordinary 24 hours, hasn't it, Sarah, when you consider what the polls were saying?
The pollsters got it very, very wrong.
They certainly did, not for the first time, because Donald Trump is indeed set to become the 47th president of the United States, becoming the first president in more than a century to win a non-consecutive term. Well, election night saw him significantly exceed expectations, securing wins in key battleground areas. Well, the victory marks an extraordinary comeback for Trump, who lost the White House to Joe Biden in 2020. And it comes after one of the most hostile campaigns in modern US history.
Well, Fox News was the first broadcaster to project that he had secured enough electoral votes to win the presidency, defeating Democrat Kamala Harris and capping a stunning political comeback 4 years after he left the White House.
Well, taking to the stage a short time after the announcement, Donald Trump thanked his supporters, describing this as the greatest political movement of all time.
America has given us an unprecedented and powerful mandate. We have taken back control of the Senate. Wow, that's great. And the Senate races in Montana, Nevada, Texas, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, were all won by the MAGA movement. They helped so much. Frankly, this was, I believe, the greatest political movement of all time. There's never been anything like this in this country, and maybe beyond. And now it's going to reach a new level of importance because we're going to help our country heal. We're going to help our country heal. We have a country that needs help, and it needs help very badly. We're going to fix our borders. We're going to fix everything about our country. And we made history for a reason tonight, and the reason is going to be just that. We overcame obstacles that nobody thought possible, and it is now clear that we've achieved the most incredible political thing. Look what happened. Is this crazy? Yes, I want to thank the American people for the extraordinary honor of being elected your 47th president and your 45th president. And every citizen, I will fight for you, for your family, and your future. Every single day, I will be fighting for you, and with every breath in my body, I will not rest until we have delivered the strong, safe, and prosperous America that our children deserve and that you deserve. Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason. And that reason was to save our country and to restore America to greatness.
Donald Trump also set out his vision for his presidency to a crowd of supporters and famous faces in Florida.
We're going to have to seal up those borders, and we're going to have to let people come into our country. We want people to come back in, but we have to We have to let them come back in, but they have to come in legally. They have to come in legally. We're going to be paying down debt. We're going to be reducing taxes. We can do things that nobody else can do. Nobody else is going to be able to do it. China doesn't have what we have. Nobody has what we have. But we have the greatest people also. Maybe that's the most important thing. We want to have borders. We want to have security. We want to have things be good, safe. We want great education. We want a strong and powerful military, and ideally, we don't have to use it. You know, we had no wars. 4 years, we had no wars.
Donald Trump speaking there. Well, the president-elect also discussed the Tesla CEO, Elon Musk, and the former independent presidential candidate, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who withdrew from the race back in August. Well, both men are expected to assume roles in the White House after Donald Trump's inauguration.
Let me tell you, we have a new star. A star is born, Elon. Now he is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He came in. And he's going to help make America healthy again.
In the early hours, Kamala Harris, recognising the difficult circumstances, chose not to speak to her supporters at her watch party on the Howard University campus in Washington, D.C. Well, the event ended before 1 a.m. local time as the outcome became clear. Now, she's expected to speak around 4 p.m. East Coast time.
Meanwhile, Republicans also regained control of the Senate, further solidifying their influence in the federal government and adding to the impact of Trump's potential victory.
Let's join our chief correspondent, Simon Marks, who's live from Washington, D.C. Simon, great to have you with us. What a result for Donald Trump. Tell us, what's the reaction been like in the Capitol?
It is pretty quiet here today, Sarah, I can tell you. As you know, Washington, D.C. is a Democratic Party stronghold, and I think people here had convinced themselves, as indeed the Democratic Party had convinced itself, that it had its arms around victory, that Kamala Harris was destined for a big win that was going to usher her into the Oval Office of the White House, make history. She'd become the first woman president, the first woman of color to occupy the presidency. And in many ways, what we witnessed last night here and into the early hours of the morning was a carbon copy for Democrats of the nightmare of 2016. The night began, as it did in 2016, with all of that confidence that the woman nominee was going to win the race. And then as hour after hour passed, the confidence ebbed away as the Republicans notched up victory after victory after victory until we got to exactly the same point as we did in the Hillary Clinton election, with that needle on the New York Times suggesting that Donald Trump had a 95% chance of victory in this election. People here are absolutely stunned. The Democrats are crestfallen. They are reeling from the outcome of this. They cannot believe it has happened again, but it's not entirely a carbon copy, because back in 2016, Donald Trump, of course, won in the Electoral College, but Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. The story of the night here in many ways is that this time around, Donald Trump has won both. He's won in the Electoral College and in the popular vote. And if you look at the popular vote numbers, in 2020, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris won 81 million votes. Last night, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz won 66 million votes. So somewhere over the last 4 years, 15 million people who supported the Democrats back in 2020 have disappeared. They've decided to sit it out, stay at home, withhold their support from Kamala Harris, and that is absolutely confounding to Democrats here in Washington and all over the country today.
Yeah, as you've been saying, Simon, a lot of parallels with events of 2016. This time around, we heard from Donald Trump consistent focus on two key issues: the economy and immigration. And do you think that's the reason why Americans have chosen for him to be president again?
Well, I think it certainly drove people to the polling station. There's no doubt about that, although the exit poll surveys, when they came out shortly after 6 o'clock in the evening here, indicated that actually for some American voters, democracy was the #1 issue. And we all thought, oh, well, that must mean Kamala Harris is going to win the election. It turns out that for an insufficient number of American voters, democracy was the #1 issue to propel Kamala Harris into the Oval Office there behind me. But I think there was more to it than just the economy and immigration. Kamala Harris had, as you know, only 107 days to seal the deal with the American electorate after Joe Biden succumbed to the cabal within the Democratic Party, led by the former Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, against him. When she became the Democratic Party's nominee, her approval rating was 35.6%. Joe Biden's approval rating was 35.5%. So she had this gargantuan task of persuading the American people, one, to like her, and two, to approve of her policies. And on that second part, detailing her policies, explaining how she was going to be different from Joe Biden, she never quite found the language to convey in detail any of her plans, and she was always surprised in interviews when she was asked, what would you have done differently over the last 4 years from Joe Biden? At times she said she wouldn't have done anything differently. And that was, I think, a major problem for her campaign. But there's also no doubt that misogyny played a role in this, that racism played a role in this, and that also there may just have been a sense among many voters that she wasn't battle-tested and she just wasn't ready for the job.
All right, Simon Marks there in Washington. We'll catch up with you throughout the program.
Well, let's move on now, because Donald Trump is the only individual to be elected as president as a convicted felon. He's due to be sentenced for fraud in a New York court on the 26th of November. So how is that going to impact his presidency? Well, to talk about that and much more, I'm joined now by the lawyer and former Harvard Law School professor, Alan Dershowitz. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Professor. I think you were saying only last night, and sorry to do this to you, but you thought Donald Trump had shot himself in the foot in the final stages. So I'm assuming that you think this was all a bit of a surprise, the fact that he came out on top.
It was a surprise to me. I thought he had it won 10 days ago, but after the Madison Square Garden fiasco and that comedian's attack on Puerto Rico and some other statements, I thought that he had snatched victory and turned it into defeat. I was wrong. There were many reasons why I think Kamala Harris lost the election, primarily among which was that she's just not qualified to be president. And she picked a vice president even less qualified than her. The American people just didn't have faith in her. And it was not racism. It was her lack of experience, her lack of policies and principles. With Trump, you know what you're getting. You might not like it. And I think a lot of people voted for Trump very reluctantly. In fact, a lot of the votes yesterday, were votes against a candidate rather than votes for a candidate. I don't think foreign policy played a big role in this election. It may have in Pennsylvania, but one hope I have is that the election of Donald Trump may see an extension of the Abraham Accords and perhaps an arrangement between the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Israel to bring about some greater stability in the Middle East. Trump did a very good job in creating the Abraham Accords. I worked with him on that back when he was president, and I look forward to, if he asks me, working with him again on trying to create peace in the Middle East.
And Mr. Dershowitz, you also say that you think Kamala Harris blew it, notably over her choice of running mate. So who should she have chosen?
Well, she should have either chosen Shapiro or Kelly. Shapiro was the governor of the most important state, Pennsylvania. Had Shapiro been chosen, I think Pennsylvania would have gone to the Democrats. Kelly, a former astronaut. But she picked an incompetent. I think she wanted to pick somebody less visible than her, less qualified than her. And she was so unqualified that it was hard to find somebody. And she found somebody even less qualified than her. And I think the package of two extremely unqualified people who laugh a lot and who didn't bring a sense of seriousness is what ultimately cost them the election. And so I'm hoping that Donald Trump will move forward constructively. My suggestion to him is that he put all his recriminations behind him, that perhaps he might even think about pardoning Hunter Biden and saying, look, let's stop using the legal system to attack our political opponents, which they did to him as well, and start afresh. And if he's prepared to do that, rather than to have recriminations, he can turn out to be a very good president.
Okay, but he's also got his own legal cases, quite a lot of them. I mean, as president-elect, is he at all, legally speaking, out of the woods?
No, he's not. But every single one of the cases, and I wrote a book about each of the cases, every single one of the cases is not valid. The New York case, nobody understands what the case is. He apparently was convicted of putting the wrong notation down about legal fees or payment of hush money. It's not a case at all, but he'll get sentenced, probably to a suspended sentence. The federal cases will probably all be dropped against him. And he now has fairly extensive immunity for what he does while president, while in the White House. And so I don't think the legal cases will affect his presidency. I hope that they teach him a lesson, though, and I hope that he says, look, under my presidency, the legal system will not be used for partisan purposes against political enemies. He'll be tempted to use it because it was used against him. He would rise above it and do a great thing if he said, no, I'm going to put it all behind us. We'll never use the legal system against our political enemies. That's not what a great democracy does.
Professor Dershowitz, we've got time for just one more quick question. I just want to talk about the campaign generally speaking, because there was pretty liberal use of some pretty ugly language. We heard words like Nazi and fascist being peppered along the campaign trail. I mean, that was all unprecedented, wasn't it?
It was, and it was wrong. Look, to call the Republicans Nazis and to call Trump Hitler is a form of Holocaust denial. It's a way of saying, look, what happened to 6 million Jews in Germany was not worse than what's going on now, a few speeches. You don't make analogies to Hitler and to Nazism in a political campaign in America. There were enough things that you can be critical of Donald Trump, enough things you can be critical of Harris without invoking terms like that. And so I hope we'll see an end to that. It didn't help the Democrats. And I hope that we have now seen an end to the use of that kind of vocabulary in political campaigns.
And finally, Trump says that he's going to unite this very deeply divided country. Tell me, how is he going to do that?
He can do it. He can do it. He can say, I'm pardoning Hunter Biden. I'm pardoning the people who were arrested for non-violently protesting the last election. Let's have a clean start. He can read Lincoln's great speech after the Civil War with malice toward none and charity for all. Let's move forward. Let's move forward. He can do it, but he has to be willing to do it. I would be happy to help him do it because I think that would be good for America and good for the world.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Alan Dershowitz, lawyer and former Harvard Law School professor. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
Donald Trump praised tech tycoon Elon Musk as a new star and a super genius during his victory speech. Well, the CEO of Tesla and chairman of X has supported Trump throughout his candidacy, becoming a rising force in the Republican Party and playing a major role in the campaign. For more reaction to the historic events in the United States, I'm joined by Elon Musk's father, Eroll Musk. Mr. Musk, appreciate you coming on with us this evening. Firstly, have you spoken to your son today and how is he feeling?
Well, no, I haven't spoken to him. I've spoken to all the other brothers and sisters. Elon's very tired, just as I am. I was up all night also doing interviews. Yes, I haven't spoken to Elon, but I'm sure they're very happy. And we are all happy because the world is going to be a safer place now. And I might say I don't agree with your previous speakers. I think that it's typical of the Democrats, the wimp Democrats, to do these terrible things that they tried on Trump and then afterwards say, yes, but we sure you won't do the same thing to us. No, I think that the law must take its course. I think Biden must be prosecuted for the criminal bribery and corruption that he's been involved in. I don't think anyone should be given a free pass on any of that stuff, including the toxic son.
Just going back to your own son, I mean, I'm assuming you're feeling like a rather proud dad today. And of course, your son got singled out in Donald Trump's speech in the early hours of this morning,
yes,
calling him a star, an amazing guy. How much of an impact do you think your son Elon had on the outcome of this election?
Well, I've no doubt whatsoever that Elon was the turning point. Elon was the turning point for Trump. There's no doubt about it. Once Elon threw his weight behind Trump, everything changed. And so there's no doubt in our minds, and certainly in my mind, that was the turning point. And as far as being proud, I mean, I was proud of my children when they were born. I mean, I'm not suddenly proud. I'm very happy with their progress. And I'm very happy with Elon's progress. I mean, it was only a few years ago that Elon was calling me evil for supporting Trump. And he, in his own way, has learned the hard way that, in fact, Trump is a much better way to go. There will be no more terrible wars. The Ukraine conflict will come to an end very soon. The Middle East conflict will be resolved very soon because the people that were in charge before had no intention of stopping any of these wars or helping to stop them in any way.
So, given everything you've just said, what do you believe is in it for your son? A post in the administration, perhaps?
No. I mean, there's nothing in it for us. We already have everything, so let's get real here. We already have everything, so we don't want anything. So what we want to do is to be part of putting things right. The fear that we've been having of the way things are going so badly that the greatest country that the world has really known is going to turn out to be a basket case in the next few years. Now, that was very worrying to us. And so now we can rest and realize that things will be better now and things will get back on track. Nobody made a vote for Trump because they were opposed to, I think as the other speaker said, it was some kind of vote against the other candidate or something like that. No, the people in America have woken up themselves to what it means to vote for these people who are talk as though they do gooders, but they do nothing good at all.
Doesn't sound like you're very surprised by the outcome of the election. And clearly the pollsters, once again, got it completely wrong. What do you think is the overarching appeal of Donald Trump in the United States? How do you explain it?
Well, he's a businessman. He's very smart, and he's a businessman. I've followed Donald Trump's career because I've been in the same career myself, and that is, property development and improving bad areas in cities and so on. I mean, he turned the whole west side of Manhattan from derelict railway sidings into some of the most beautiful buildings you can ever imagine. He's a businessman. He turns dirt into gold. Let's put it like that. That's what the business people do. We turn nothing into something. And that's who we are. That's actually what it's all about these days. It's about the people who can do that kind of thing against the people who seem to not be able to do anything. And so we can't keep turning to the people who are quite useless and saying to them, yes, well, we'll take your point of view in future. We can't do that anymore. We have to look at the future with a more solid approach. I mean, right now, I think that in England, for example, the British people will find their feet now that Trump has won. We were worried, of course, that the Democrats would bring out their cheating machine again. But it seems this time they didn't manage to do it. But the British, for example, who are suffering tremendously at the moment under this really silly new regime, fascist-type regime, they will now find their feet. And I can more or less imagine that by about February next year, March, Starmer will be gone.
You recently described the UK as being on a stairway to hell under Keir Starmer. Do you think the special relationship between London and Washington is going to be stained or even damaged under a Trump presidency? Do you think there is a far-right movement spreading across the world?
No. Nothing is far right. This is nonsense. It's not far right. Elon is not far right. None of these people who protested in England are far right. They are normal. They are normal people. And so the problem is that can Trump's people actually negotiate with these woke sort of lefties in England who don't seem to have the capacity to understand anything? And that is a problem. But as I say, I think the British people will find a solution. They must find a solution, because they can't go on with jailing their own people and removing thugs from prisons to find place for ordinary people. That's something that the Germans tried in the 30s. You can't do that. It's not the way, certainly not the way in England.
But there are figures, aren't there, in Trump's former administration who've said things along the lines of he's got authoritarian tendencies. I wonder what you make of that.
No.
And do you agree with that?
No, not at all. I mean, in his previous presidency, he never showed any of those things. He let people do whatever they wanted against him. He never became authoritarian. I mean, it's just rubbish. That's just the propaganda from the woke lefties, or whatever they are. No, that's nonsense. No, he's a businessman. So businessmen like myself, we look at how we can improve things and what can we do to make things better. Just as Elon is a businessman, he looks to see how can we make things better. And you can see, for example, that Elon has made a number of things better in the world. Excuse me, I'm sorry about that. So he's made a lot of things better in the world. And, and that's what Trump will do. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, we can all get down on and thank the Lord that we have what's happened. I mean, it doesn't take much sense to understand that the world has taken a step in the right direction.
So where do you think it all went wrong for the Harris campaign? Did Joe Biden take too long to step aside?
Well, Biden was ridiculous. And I mean, he's essentially, it's been shown that he's something of a criminal. I mean, he's been selling American secrets to America's enemies. I mean, it's laughable. And as for this woman, I mean, anyone with the slightest IQ could listen to this woman say anything, and it's a joke. I mean, it is absolutely a joke to listen to this woman. I mean, anyone who had the slightest idea that she was capable of being the president, I mean, it's laughable. It's absolutely laughable. So, obviously she was going to be a puppet. She was going to be, I take it, Obama's puppet or something like that. That's what people suggest. But no, I mean, this was not presidential material. This was a joke.
When you hear Donald Trump saying things like he's going to go after his enemies, or there's this alleged list of enemies as far as Donald Trump is concerned, what do you read into that? And who do you think should be most worried at this particular stage?
Well, I don't think, going after your enemies is a strange phrase. We permanently in life, in business, are always looking at the performance of people that we're in competition with. And so that's, pretty normal. But as far as, look, these cases that were brought in court against Trump were laughable. They were not cases at all. So this is criminality on the part of the Democrats. And so you can't just let it go. I mean, you must deal with it. They have to be brought to book for the things that they did. I certainly don't believe myself. It's just I would not let somebody attempt to destroy me and my family or something like that and just say afterwards, no, it's fine. It's fine. I'm okay with that. No, I'm not okay with that. You do something bad to me, we want to speak to you about it.
And finally, Donald Trump has been saying that he will be uniting a divided country. Do you see this happening?
Well, he's already done it. He's already just united a divided country. So, it's already been done. I can't understand your question. He has already just united a divided country. So your question is a moot question. He's already done that.
All right, Errol, Musk, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
So, with Donald Trump officially securing the presidency, all eyes are on the escalating situation in Israel and Gaza. Well, Trump has boldly promised to end the conflict very quickly, though his remarks often sidestep the deep complexities of the Palestinian crisis. Well, in the United States, Trump has gained significant support from Arab voters, particularly in the crucial swing state of Michigan, making his stance on the Middle East even more critical. Meanwhile, on the diplomatic front, tensions are rising. The UK, under Labour leadership and the Labour leader Keir Starmer, has moved to limit arms sales to Israel, a notable shift in foreign policy.
Well, joining us now to discuss this and more is Husam Zomlot, the Palestinian ambassador to the UK, live from Al Arabia's bureau in London. Ambassador, thank you very much for your time. Firstly, congratulations from Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. He said, "We will remain steadfast over our commitment to peace. We are confident that the US, under your leadership, would support the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people." What are your hopes and aspirations for Trump's second term?
It's exactly that President-elect Trump will deliver on his promises during the election campaign, and that's why he gained the support of many Arab voters, pro-Palestine voters, that he promises to stop the killing, quoting him, and to bring peace to the Middle East. The issue here is that we don't have much time because the scale of the killings, Israel's mass murder and destruction in Gaza and all over the occupied territory cannot wait for Trump to assume office in January. We need him to intervene now to deliver his promises, and time of the essence. And also we want to make sure that a new page is based on solid grounds, as President Abbas said in his congratulation letter, that it must be based on a fair, just peace that would fulfill the inalienable and legitimate rights of the Palestinian people, as opposed to previous attempts of bypassing the Palestinian issue, which is the core issue in the region, and rather push the Palestinians towards further compromises that emptied the very concept of self-determination from its meaning and turned the idea of a state of Palestine into a Mickey Mouse state. Now we need to learn the lessons of the last 8 years, 9 years, and we need to start afresh, and we need to make sure that we actually do stop this carnage that Israel is inflicting in Palestine and the region.
You talk about starting afresh and a new page. Mahmoud Abbas is still there. Donald Trump and Mahmoud Abbas they go back quite some time now. Do you think a new approach is also needed by the Palestinian authorities? And what do you think that new approach is then?
Well, I was the Palestinian ambassador to the US during the first Trump administration, and I can assure you that our policy, our strategy has always been engagement. But we do not engage for the sake of engagement. We engage on the basis of actually resolving the Palestinian issue in accordance with international consensus, in accordance with international law, and first and foremost, to fulfill the legitimate rights of our people. First is the right to self-determination, and second, the issue of refugees and resolving their issue in accordance with international law. Now, we've tried that. I was there to organize the first meeting and visit by President Abbas to Washington, and the meeting with President Trump then and his administration. And that was not the only visit during that time. And our engagement was tailored towards that, because President Trump at the time promised peace. However, what we received was not exactly what we would accept, and we made our position absolutely bluntly clear. We reject any attempts to bypass the Palestinian issue, to undermine the Palestinian issue, to push the Palestinian people and leadership around, to blackmail us. And therefore, we hope that message was delivered very clearly after all these years, and that when President Trump says he wants to make peace in the Middle East, he knows that now peace does not mean that people have to give up their rights. Peace means that people achieve their legitimate rights. And that's why we would always extend our hands should the other side ready to engage in that journey. And we always say that we are ready to make that journey towards peace. Our position has been consistent, clear, and it couldn't be clearer now, especially in light of what is happening in the last 13 months of this genocide, mass murder, mass destruction, utter disregard by Israel of the basic human, let alone international law, human value, I mean. And therefore, this is a time when we need an American president that would rein in the unhinged Netanyahu and will deliver that promise that he will stop the carnage and bring about peace. So answering your question in a nutshell, yes, we would extend our hands if we find a partner that would really want to deliver this long waited for peace in the Middle East.
So in saying all of that, what will be your approach to Donald Trump, knowing his character and the history?
Well, we don't deal with characters and history. What we deal with is the U.S. And the U.S. has democratically elected a president. And therefore, we respect the democratic process in the U.S. and we'll deal with it as such. What we need to do is to make sure that that engagement is constructive, that engagement is based on representing our people and the legitimate rights of our people and the legitimate grievances of our people. Our people are wounded. Our people have gone through a genocide over the last 13 months, and not just in Gaza, all over the occupied territories. And the world is following what is happening in Jenin, what is happening in Jerusalem, what is happening in Hebron, and all over the place. Therefore, our engagement has got to be based on a U.S. position that is clear, to be in alignment with international law, with international consensus, clear that it wants to establish a state of Palestine, clear in its alignment with the region. And you have followed the latest initiative by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Global Alliance to establish a state of Palestine, to end Israel's occupation and colonization. So if the new administration goes with that, of course, they will have partners in us.
If Donald Trump manages to do this and end the conflict in Gaza, which is one of his key pledges, even bring about some sort of a long-lasting peace settlement, he'd obviously be succeeding where many others have failed over many years. And we've heard Hamas saying in the last couple of hours that Donald Trump should learn from Biden's mistakes. I'm wondering whether you share that opinion and what those mistakes are that Hamas is referring to.
No, what we need to, I don't know what Hamas said, but we need to learn from the mistakes of many decades. This is not just the last 4 years. We need to learn from the mistakes of the last 30 years, where the U.S. was the sole mediator in a failed peace process, simply because the road ahead was not clear. While the U.S. asked us, the PLO, to recognize Israel as a state, we were never recognized as a state. And that never leveled the field. And then Israel interpreted that as a license to actually encroach. And the rest is history, because the settlements quadrupled. Many are saying the possibility of a two-state solution has been undermined. What we need to do now is actually not just issue statements and words, we need deeds. We need action. And the action begin with stopping the genocide in Gaza, as President Trump promised. And it goes immediately after that to visit the root cause of all this. The root cause is very well known to the world and to everyone. The root cause is the illegal occupation, is the illegal colonization, is the besiegement, the subjugation of the people, is the system of apartheid that is imposed on the Palestinian people for decades. And especially following the ruling of the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, only a few months ago in July, that Israel's continued presence in the occupied territory is unlawful. All of its settlements are unlawful and must be dismantled. And any third party must cease immediately, including the U.S., any material, legal, or political support to Israel. So in light of all this situation, what we expect from a U.S. administration is very clear. There is no time to waste now. And we do not expect President-elect Trump to wait until January. That will not be delivering his promise. That will be the worst start, because people are losing their lives by huge numbers, as you all reporting and know. Their livelihoods is being destroyed, so we need it now. And this is the real test. This is the real test of leadership. This is the real test of statesmanship. And this is the real test to actually deliver on the bigger promise of delivering peace in the Middle East. And I assure you, the road is very clear. I mean, there is no other conflict in the history of conflict that has such clarity, has such consensus globally of how to resolve it. The problem is in the political will. So the lesson that we need to learn, all of us that we need to learn, that the US cannot just sit there as a mediator while they are completely and utterly backing one side. This dishonest brokering has got to end, and the US has got to bring itself with the rest of the world to implement international consensus and resolution rather than to enforce and dictate on the Palestinian side.
Thank you so much for your time this evening. That was Husam Zomlot, the Palestinian ambassador to the UK.
Okay, so what will a second Trump presidency look like? Well, let's get some insights on that. We can speak to Donald Trump's former White House Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney. Thank you so much for being with us. Just wondering, what are you hearing from the Trump campaign team? Have you been in touch with them?
I have, in terms of what comes next or how excited they are. I mean, there's been a lot of communication, as you can imagine. There's a lot of excitement over the result. I think even many of them within the campaign were surprised by the fact that Trump won all of the swing states last night. They were confident of victory, cautiously optimistic, I think is the right words to use. I don't think anybody foresaw them running the table with all of these swing states like they did last night.
And what do you think the first priorities are going to be for the campaign team? And I'm talking about the transition and also the early days of the Trump presidency.
Sure. Well, the immediate focus will be on staffing up the cabinet, staffing up the roughly 4,000 positions that a president of the United States has to fill with every new administration. Once you get past that, and we're happy to talk about that if you like, you get into the policy. The policy will take two different tracks at the same time. There'll be a legislative agenda, which will be focusing on extending the Trump tax cuts for 2017, which are due to expire in mid of next year. And then also there'll be an executive agenda, which means it'll be operating within the executive branch of the government, dealing with immigration, tariffs, and also deregulation.
And, you know, how confident are you that he'll have good advice from his inner circle and that he will actually act on this?
Yeah, you go back 6 or 8 months and I was scratching my head as to who might go work for him. Over the course of the last several weeks, if not longer, it's become readily apparent that there's some really good quality people who are going to go into the administration. Some names you might recognize. Mike Pompeo's name comes up from time to time for a spot in the next cabinet. Senator Bill Hagerty might not be familiar to you. He's very highly regarded here. He was an ambassador from the United States to Japan and then became a senator from the state of Tennessee. His name has been floated for the Secretary of State. There are folks from the previous administration as well. Bob Lighthizer, our trade administrator, Robert O'Brien, the national security advisor. So at the very highest levels, there'll be some names that folks all around the world recognize and respect. I'm still concerned about the folks who will fill the secondary positions, the non-Senate confirmed positions, sort of out of the public eye. And there may be some folks in there who make me scratch my head as to why they're there. Peter Navarro, probably going back into the administration, fresh out of jail. Unclear as to Steve Bannon, whether or not he'll take that role or not. But we'll see as the days and the weeks unwrap.
But you'd have thought, wouldn't you? I mean, he's been president once before, Donald Trump. So obviously being president for the second time and 4 years later means he's going into the job with a whole lot more experience than he had back in 2016. So that should inspire some confidence in terms of who he gives the top jobs to. And I'm just wondering whether more broadly you think the second Trump presidency is going to be significantly different from the first.
The way I describe it is this. Whatever you liked about the first term, you're going to like more. Whatever you disliked about the first term, you're going to dislike more. And that's for the exact reason that you mentioned. I don't think Trump, in all candor, expected to win in 2016. He certainly had not done the work for the transition that a typical campaign would do. He's not making that mistake this time. 4 years ago, it took him, actually, goodness gracious, it's been 8 years ago now. It took him 18 months to get fully up to speed. This team will be able to hit the ground running, not only on day one, but they've already started today. And so you're not going to see that learning curve. You're going to see a much more quicker implementation of the agenda than you did in 2017.
And I saw on your X feed, you put out this list, and you've put out a list of who you see as being the biggest losers in this electoral race. We've got the Obamas, we've got celebrities who endorsed Kamala Harris. Just wondering what your thinking was when you put that list together and where you think it all went so wrong for the Democrats.
Well, it's two different lists, two different questions. I think those are folks who thought they had influence in the outcome of elections and don't, or those are topics that cost Democrats votes. For example, the diversity, the DEI movement, diversity, equity, and inclusion, celebrity endorsements, not necessarily the celebrity themselves, but the idea that people care who Taylor Swift is voting for. I think those things, the air went out of those last night. But that doesn't go to why I think she lost. I think she lost for a very simple reason. You can overthink it if you want to. But I think at the end of the day, elections are won and lost on very simple principles. And the simple principle that she failed was effectively inability to answer the question, how would she be different than Joe Biden? She got asked that question 5 or 6 times from very friendly outlets. She gave 5 or 6 different answers. None of them were especially compelling. And I think a lot of folks just looked at her and said, you know what, I don't like Donald Trump, but I'm not comfortable voting for somebody who I don't know very well and who I don't know that much about. I think at the end of the day, that is the major mistake that she made. And that, more than anything on that list that I put out, cost her the election.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Mick Mulvaney, Trump's former White House Chief of Staff. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, much has been made about Trump's early victory speech, thanking his high-profile supporters and voters as well, telling them he intends to keep the promises he made during the campaign, vowing to fix everything and lead a golden age for America. Well, for more, I'm joined now by the former speechwriter to Bill Clinton, Paul Glastris. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us this evening. When did you realize that it was over and things really weren't going the way the Democrats had hoped? At what point last night did you see that the tide had turned?
Oh, what a good question. I think it's fairly early in the evening, and I'm probably blotting out some of my memories of that unpleasant episode. But, you know, I think that, you know, it was really never looking good. None of the returns that people were hoping for came through. And I think, you know, by 8:30 in the evening, it was pretty clear on the faces of the newscasters and in the texts I was getting from friends and family that this was going to be a tough night for the Democrats. And it certainly was.
We are yet to hear from Kamala Harris, but in your opinion, was it the message, the messenger, or both that lost the election?
Look, I think we don't know enough to conclude what lost the Democrats the election. That's going to be a subject of discussion for weeks, months, maybe years. The bottom line is she ran a strong race, and it didn't come through for her or the Democrats. And again, we're going to have to look at the data, think this through, but it's been widely noted that every incumbent party of a government that has experienced this terrible inflation has not been reelected. And the Democrats had some sense that they could beat it. The economy of the United States, compared to every other nation in the country, in the world, is strong. But, you know, you're asking folks who are struggling to make their car payments to be grateful that it isn't worse. Or to be grateful that the stock market is high, and they remembered the prices of things when Donald Trump was president. And that was enough for them to say, well, I don't like this. Maybe I'll get more of that. They forgot, or no one quite made the argument to them, that Donald Trump inherited a great economy from the Democrats, as he's going to inherit a great economy from the Democrats again and take credit for it. But it was a hard sell to be an incumbent in times of inflation.
Over the last few days, we've been hearing, this would be very, very tight, very, very close. How surprised are you by the size of the defeat?
I'm pretty surprised that it is as big as it is, I got to say. I thought if there was any chance of a large win, it would be on Kamala Harris's side. Again, so much going for the United States. But it wasn't. It was quite surprising. I think you heard Mick Mulvaney say it surprised even the Trump people, and that's what I was hearing. There were people inside the Trump world who were very, very worried that he and his campaign were losing steam in the last 2 weeks. So even they were a little bit surprised.
Mm.
Yeah, indeed. Extremely surprising for a lot of people, including us. You've said that this looks like a wholesale rejection of the Democratic Party. If that's the case, surely that's a fairly worrying development for you and the party that you work for at such a high level.
Look, the party has some deep thinking to do, and they're going to have to figure out how their coalition can do better. What was it that, look, in many senses, people aren't surprised. It has been clear for many, many years that the Democratic brand is toxic in large parts of the country and with a growing majority of the working class, which is the group that Democrats used to have always claimed to represent and used to actually get the votes of. So what happened is part of a long process that Democrats have been trying to work against, trying to fix. And, honestly, Joe Biden did a lot, tried to do a lot to fix that problem. The bulk of the manufacturing jobs, and there's hundreds of thousands of them that have been created under the Biden administration, went to rural working class areas. The anti-monopoly work that the administration has done was beneficial to small farmers, small businessmen and women, to consumers. But it wasn't enough to break the sense that middle and lower middle class America has, that the Democrats are for the elite, and Donald Trump and the larger conservative news ecosystem was able to convince them that the problem was, not large corporations who were raising prices, but immigrants and, people of color, sort of the flipping the enemy from large corporations to the people who, are least able to defend themselves. And this is a problem that Democrats have not been able to solve.
Sure.
And if they want to get back into power, they're going to have to solve it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed. We're going to have to leave it there. Former speechwriter to President Bill Clinton. Paul Glastris, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Let's go back to Washington now, where Simon Marks is standing by.
Thanks, Sarah. Good afternoon once again from Washington, D.C. A new Washington as the world and the United States grapples with the reality of Donald Trump's re-election as president of the USA. This has been an intensely contested race, defined by high-stakes tensions, personal attacks and even assassination attempts. When the day began yesterday, we all thought we might have to wait several days for the outcome of this election. It was going to be that tight in the key battleground states, the polls suggested. Kamala Harris's campaign manager even warned Democrats they were going to need to be patient for the final results to develop. But as some of the early numbers came in, it became apparent that we were witnessing not a groundswell of support in Harris's direction, but a tsunami of backing for Trump. Texas and Florida proved far less competitive than Democrats had hoped. The Trump victory in North Carolina saw the beginning of the air going out of the vice president's balloon. And by around 2:30 in the morning, when Trump claimed victory before those crowds of jubilant supporters in West Palm Beach, even though he had not yet been declared the winner by the country's television networks, we all knew it was an inevitability. Kamala Harris failing to show up at her own victory party had been an earlier harbinger of the gloom that enveloped Democrats from coast to coast. She will now address her supporters in around 2 hours' time here in Washington, D.C. Now, despite the election having been called, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are still competing for Michigan's 15 electoral college votes. In 2020, Biden won Michigan with 51% of the vote to Trump's 48%, while in 2016, Trump narrowly claimed Michigan with 47.6% to Hillary Clinton's 47.4%. So we're going to cross to Michigan, and our correspondent, Mitch McCann, who joins me now from Detroit. And Mitch, what is the latest state of the count in Michigan? And is it going, do we think, to add to Donald Trump's total number of electors in the Electoral College? Or is Kamala Harris possibly going to prove able to pull some kind of victory out of the hat in the state? I think we can't actually talk to Mitch McCann in Detroit at the moment, but as I was saying, Kamala Harris is going to be addressing her supporters here at around 4 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern Time. How will she find the words to convey the disappointment that Democrats all over the country are experiencing as a result of almost having relived 2016 all over again? In 2016, of course, the Democrats thought that Hillary Clinton was on the cusp of a major victory. They expected her to smash the glass ceiling and become the country's first female president. It was not to be. That evening started with Hillary Clinton a 90% certainty to become the nation's president. Then support ebbed away from her in Donald Trump's direction until the needle flipped to the other direction and he was conveyed into the White House. The feeling last night here was very similar. When the evening began, we all thought that it was an inevitability that Kamala Harris might win this race. Certainly Democrats expected that. They had been exuding confidence for days, saying that they were witnessing a surge of support, particularly from women voters in Kamala Harris's direction. In the end, though, it was not to be. And once again, as in 2016, the needle moved at first gradually in Donald Trump's direction, and then as a tsunami of Republican votes were reported and counted from competitive states all over the country, the New York Times projected that Donald Trump had a 95% chance of returning to the Oval Office. The first president elected to 2 non-consecutive terms for 130 years. He will go down in history as the nation's 45th and the nation's 47th president. And for the nation's 46th president, Joe Biden, down there at the White House behind me, there are massive questions. What it must have been like last night in the family quarters of the White House, where the Bidens were watching these returns coming in. Joe Biden, who just a few weeks ago, 107 days ago, had been defenestrated from his position as the Democrats' presidential nominee as the result of a cabal, essentially, led by the former Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, backed up by a whole whole raft of members of Congress who witnessed Joe Biden's performance in that June the 27th television debate with Donald Trump with dismay. The earliest television debate between two presidential candidates in modern American history. Joe Biden, it was his idea. He goaded Donald Trump into participating in that debate because he thought he was going to establish very clearly that he was the leading candidate, Joe Biden, in the race for the White House. But then in the event, of course, it was a disaster for Joe Biden, and it led ultimately to his removal as the Democrats' presidential nominee. For Kamala Harris, a sudden opportunity to lead the party into the November election, but only 107 days to make the case with America's voters that she could be trusted with the keys to the Oval Office and that she had the policies ready to go on day one to, as she kept putting it on the campaign trail, to turn the page. When she was challenged about what she meant by that, why would you be wanting to turn the page from the administration of the president you'd been serving, she indicated that she wanted to turn the page from the last 10 years in this country, dominated as they have been by former President Donald Trump, a decade that began with his journey down that golden escalator in 2015 in Manhattan, written off at the time as a joke candidate for the presidency. Now he makes history as he prepares to return to the White House in January. Let's see if we can go to Detroit in Michigan now and get the latest on the vote in that all-important battleground state. We still don't know the outcome of it. Mitch McCann is there. Mitch, what is the latest in Detroit?
Yes, good afternoon, Simon, from the battleground state of Michigan, as you pointed out. Now, look, this race is almost over because 95% of the votes have been counted, and Donald Trump leads Kamala Harris in the state by around 90,000 votes. But the race hasn't been called yet by the US networks, and part of that might be due to the fact that some votes are still being counted here in Wayne County, where Detroit is, which usually leans heavily Democratic. But Kamala Harris would need to do exceptionally well in the remaining votes to pull off a victory here. But she is still behind, as I say, Donald Trump ahead by 90,000 votes. Now, Simon, I've been speaking to both Democrats and Republicans here in this state. A few hours ago, it seems, last night, we went to the Democratic Watch Party here in Detroit, and it was a very somber occasion. It wasn't much of a party at all. In fact, the lights went off and the party ended early. There were some very unhappy people, obviously, being Democrats. This morning, I sent a message to a Republican contact I have here in Michigan who is involved in a group called Auto Workers for Trump, very heavily involved in the Michigan auto industry. I said, "How are you feeling this morning?" And he replied, "Like $1 million," with 5 exclamation points. So some predictable reactions from both Democrats and Republicans. The race too close to call here, but Donald Trump ahead at this stage by around 90,000 votes. Simon.
Which is absolutely amazing, Mitch, because it means that Donald Trump's lead in the Electoral College, if he wins that state, is going to be extended. And it is perfectly possible that by the time this is all done, this is actually going to look like the one thing nobody thought that we were going to see here in this election, and that is a Donald Trump landslide. The Democrats said they thought there might be a Kamala Harris landslide in the battleground states. Many people thought there might be a narrow Kamala Harris win or a narrow Donald Trump win. But, you know, Kamala Harris is poised to have the worst electoral college performance of any Democrat candidate since Michael Dukakis in his losing election battle against George H.W. Bush. So the people there in Michigan, fueled as many of them were by hostility towards the Biden-Harris administration's handling of the war in Gaza, they really now are playing a pivotal role, potentially, in ushering the former president back to office on the back of a tidal wave.
Yeah, that's very much the case, Simon. Look, this is an important issue, the war in Gaza, right across the United States, but especially so here in Michigan. And you and I have talked about this. More than 200,000 people here in Michigan identify as Arab Americans, so from the Middle East or North African roots. And many of those communities are extremely unhappy, as you say, with the way the Biden administration has been dealing with this war and their support for Israel. I've spoken to people that have family members affected by this in the Middle East. I spoke to a man a few weeks ago that has a nephew in Gaza that has been living in the Jabalia refugee camp, and he was not sure how he was going to vote. Well, I can tell you, in Dearborn, which is an Arab-majority city here in Michigan, the first in the United States, Donald Trump is leading that by more than 2,000 votes at this stage over Kamala Harris. So I can tell you that has had an effect here in Dearborn in Michigan as well. Donald Trump has spent some time here in the last couple of weeks, in fact in the last week, trying to court votes in Dearborn, Michigan from Arab Americans. So that Arab American vote seems to have made quite a difference here for Donald Trump. And now those voters are really hoping he can come through with some of his promises where he says he can end the war quickly.
Mitch McCann reporting for us live from Detroit in Michigan. Many thanks for that report, Mitch. And as Mitch was saying, it is absolutely clear that in the battleground state of Michigan, hostility towards the Biden-Harris administration's handling of the war in Gaza played a substantial role in building support for Donald Trump. Mostly, perhaps, because it simply led Democrats, grassroots Democrats who would traditionally have voted for Kamala Harris, to sit this race out. And if you take a look at the numbers, and I know we're all awash in numbers after this election, but there is one set of numbers that actually really tells the story of what took place here on Tuesday. If you go back to 2020, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, when they were on the ticket, they secured 81 million votes from Democrats all over the country. Yesterday, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz secured only 66 million votes from Democrats. So somewhere, 15 or 16 million votes over 4 years for the Democrats have simply evaporated. Donald Trump's vote held up pretty much. He won about 75 million votes in 2020. This time around, he's at about 72, maybe 73 million by the time this is wrapped up. So it is a real conundrum for Democrats to understand why so many of their supporters 4 years ago appear to have fled the party. And that is one of the reasons why this is about to become a crisis for the Democratic Party as recriminations begin, and they will only intensify in the event that Donald Trump, within a matter of days, when the count is completed in the various congressional battles that are taking place all over the country, if the Republicans end up with control of the House of Representatives, and they've already got now control of the Senate and the presidency, the Republicans will have a 6-3 majority in the United States Supreme Court to count on. Donald Trump may even get the opportunity to extend that majority during his next 4 years in the White House. Donald Trump is going to come into office with a degree of authority that no American president in the modern era has previously been able to marshal. An opportunity to get done at the White House, on Capitol Hill, and if he's lucky in Supreme Court decisions, whatever he wants to do in order to transform America and to build what he described last night as a new golden age for the country. But his opponents and critics deeply fear is going to be a much more authoritarian, less democratic governing system. We know, for example, that Donald Trump has said that he will terminate the traditional independence of the Department of Justice once he gets back into power. It is all but certain that the federal criminal charges against Donald Trump for allegedly subverting the outcome of the 2020 presidential election will simply fall by the wayside once he is back in the presidency. He still will have to be sentenced, by the way, in New York later this month in connection with the 34 felony convictions as a result of the Stormy Daniels hush money payments trial. But it is absolutely clear that beyond that, Donald Trump is going to have the opportunity to pretty much advance his agenda in any way that he thinks possible once he is sworn in and takes the oath of office at his second inauguration. That second inauguration will take place on January the 20th at high noon here in Washington, D.C. That is constitutionally the date on which the inauguration has to take place. Prior to that, the Electoral College will be meeting here on January the 6th to certify the outcome of this election. It was, of course, on January the 6th, 2021, that Donald Trump's rampaging mob up on Capitol Hill tried to subvert the outcome of the presidential election. So dramatic moments ahead in January, and what that second inaugural looks like. Will the Bidens attend? Will Kamala Harris and the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, attend? It's going to be fascinating to see. Let's head to Pennsylvania next, where Donald Trump has won the state's 19 electoral college votes. As we know, in 2020, Joe Biden won Pennsylvania with 50% of the vote, while Trump earned 49%. In 2016, it was another tight margin, with Trump taking the state with 49% to Hillary Clinton's 48%. Well, for more on the role that the Keystone State has played in Donald Trump's victory, let's go to our reporter Ara Spitzer, who is in Philadelphia for us today. And to all intents and purposes, Ara, it was the Pennsylvania result that really meant this election in very large measure was over. What did Kamala Harris fail to do in Pennsylvania in order to seal the deal? Because that's a blue wall state, and she desperately needed to win it.
Well, Simon, I'm here next to the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, one of the most potent symbols of American democracy, the place where the founding fathers signed the U.S. Constitution in the late 18th century. And now, whether people like it or not, Donald Trump has become an even bigger story in the overall story of U.S. democracy. And looking at Pennsylvania, which was, of course, supposed to be the real cornerstone of the Democrats' blue wall, the states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, that blue wall crumbled as we watched the results from here on election night. The forecast was an extremely close race. And in the end, at least where the count stands right now, Donald Trump is up about 2.5 percentage points. That's why we got a result much quicker than anyone anticipated in Pennsylvania. And for the Democrats here, a day of reckoning, as you said, trying to figure out what went wrong, how this blue wall crumbled. Certainly the party for decades has seen themselves and represented themselves as the real party of the American worker, the working class party. And when you look at the exit polls coming out from who came to the polls and how they voted, the working class party is as clearly belongs to Donald Trump at this point. I talked to some Republicans last night, and they mentioned how they saw their party broadening their coalition, bringing in even more working class voters, bringing in minority voters. And we have seen big gains, for example, with Latino voters, both here in Pennsylvania and across America. And those are trends that the Democratic Party here really has no answers for right now, at least publicly. They were, of course, expecting that blue wall to hold. That's what they were saying. And the results turned out far differently, as we all know.
Ara Spitzer live in Philadelphia, detailing a disastrous night there for Democrats and a disastrous night all over the country. So simply astonishing developments here, paving the way for Donald Trump's return to the Oval Office. That is all from me here in Washington. Let's send it back to the studio where Tom and Sarah are waiting.
Thank you so much for that wonderful analysis there, Simon Marks.
Yeah, he's got a lot of encyclopedic knowledge, hasn't he?
He really,
I think he's covered.
really...
He told us he's covered, I think, something like 7 or 8 US elections up until this point. So he's giving us lots of useful knowledge. And of course, the polls got it so wrong, didn't they? And that's something that's taken everyone by surprise. And that's what we're going to talk about now, because as we said, Donald Trump's victory defied the pollsters, defied the expectations. If this holds, he will not only have just won the presidency, but also potentially a majority in the Senate and Congress. Well, for a breakdown of this astonishing result, we can speak once again to the co-founder of YouGov, Peter Kellner. Peter, goodness me, what a lot has changed since we spoke 24 hours ago. What's your initial reaction to this news?
Well, as a pollster, or a recovering pollster, I'm sad that my polling colleagues across America, almost all of them, seem to have got it just as wrong as they got it in 2020 and in 2016, is they simply underestimated Trump support and overestimated the Democratic candidates' support across the country and in the swing states. There will be, as that was after the last two elections, a post-mortem by the pollsters over the next few months. I can think of three possible explanations, and it may be a combination of two or all three. Firstly, it does look as if Latinos swung to Trump much more than people expected, especially the last week after that insult of Puerto Ricans being garbage. It looks, especially in Pennsylvania, where there are lots of Puerto Ricans, as if they were immune to that. And instead of voting for Harris, as many people expected, a lot of them voted for Trump. Secondly, as I think you mentioned a few minutes ago, there's a turnout issue. It does look, the turnout will be down. There's still a lot of votes to be counted, especially in California, but it does look as if turnout is down, and it may well be that a number of the people that the pollsters thought would turn out for Harris in the end simply didn't turn out at all. And the third thing is, it may just be, and it may be what happened last time and the time before, some people simply lied. They didn't want to admit to a pollster that they were going to vote for Trump. There's an ugly phrase called social satisficing, where some people in a poll give the answer that they think the pollster wants to hear, not what they really think. And it may be that that leads to people who are going to vote for Trump not admitting it.
Mr. Kellner, as you said, many people did expect a Harris victory. A lot of factors at play here. But really, how did these pollsters get their predictions so very wrong?
Well, let me start by saying that it looks to me, when all the votes are counted, that Trump will have got a lead. And they've said the national polls, the national votes, he will end up with a lead of around 2 percentage points across the country. And if you look at the range of polls published, around last week and over the weekend, they range from a 3-point Trump lead to a 4-point Harris lead. So some of the polls were pretty close nationally. On the other hand, in the swing states, I think all the polls seem to have got the swing states, almost all of them, wrong. Not by massive numbers, but consistently by modest amounts. And as I said a few minutes ago, the pollsters will be looking into this because it doesn't do their industry any good. When I was, when I was an active pollster, we were desperate to get things right, not simply for matters of pride, but because we didn't want to damage our business. We didn't want to damage our brands by getting things wrong. These pollsters would have done all the things they thought they could do. But for the third time running, they seem to have made roughly the same mistake.
So given all of that, what really stands out most for you from this election victory? Are there any surprises there?
I'll tell you one thing that surprised me. It doesn't affect the overall picture, but bizarrely, although all the swing states went to Trump, the shift to Trump in the swing states was not as great as in the safe Republican and safe Democratic states. So there is a differential. If you look at the places like New York and Massachusetts and California, as far as we can tell, or Texas and Florida, they moved much more firmly to Trump because they were safe states either way. It didn't affect who won them, but the movement of Trump was actually narrower, oddly enough, in the swing states. Now, why is that? It may have been that the Republicans were more determined to turn out in the swing states where it really matters, and the Democrats failed to do that. But that's one of the things that the pollsters will be looking at, that they seem to get the swing states more wrong than the national picture.
Well, obviously, next time around it will be a bit easier because Donald Trump won't be running for office again if he's served 2 terms by that stage. But just in conclusion, I mean, what do you think everything we've been talking about and all the polls that have sort of been slightly off the mark, what does all of this say about American politics? Do you think there's a conclusion to be drawn here?
One of the problems is that you see a result and then you look at all the things that might have caused a Trump victory. Had just a few percentage points shifted, we'd be discussing all the reasons why Harris won. An election is an amalgam of lots of different factors, ebbs and flows, little influences this way, little influences that way. And if you don't mind, the big thing I say is that the economy and immigration worked very strongly for Trump. In some ways, the interesting thing is not why did he win, but why didn't he win by far more, given the unpopularity of Biden, the economy, and immigration. And on the personal issues, Harris from the polls was scoring very well. As a person, Americans preferred Harris over Trump quite distinctly, but that couldn't overcome these big issues around Biden, around the economy, and around immigration.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed. Peter Kellner, the co-founder of YouGov. Thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.
In Russia, relations with the United States are said to be at a historic low. However, the Kremlin says it is open to talk and see what happens when Donald Trump returns to the White House in January.
In September, a smirking Vladimir Putin said he wanted Democratic candidate Kamala Harris to win the US election. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
As for the favorites in the US elections, it is not for us to determine that. It is, after all, the choice of the American people. I have already said the favorites was the acting president, Mr. Biden, but he has withdrawn from the race. But he recommended that all his supporters back Mrs. Harris. So we will do the same. We will support her. She has such an expressive and infectious laugh. It shows she's doing well. I mean, Trump, he's imposed more restrictions and sanctions on Russia than any president has ever imposed before. And if Mrs. Harris is doing well, maybe she will refrain from doing something like that. Ultimately, it's the choice of the American people, and we will respect that.
President Putin speaking there. So how does Russia view the prospect of dealing with a President Trump rather than a President Kamala Harris? Well, I'm joined now from Moscow by the MP for United Russia and host of 60 Minutes on Russia's Rossiya 1 channel, Yevgeniy Popov. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, Mr. Popov. Donald Trump has won the election by a clear margin. I'm just wondering how this news has gone down in Moscow, in your opinion.
Thank you for giving me your floor, first of all. And I would like to remind you that the U.S. election were in 9,000 kilometers from Moscow and from battlefield where we are fighting for freedom right now. But in case of Trump, I can say you that he is more unpredictable than Mrs. Harris. We, of course, sure that our country will speak, will talk with any president of the United States if we together will sit on around the table. But as you remember, Mr. Trump many times mentioned Russia and Mr. Putin. Even more, his future vice president, Vance, rejected to call Russia as an enemy. Of course, we were heard it and noticed it. But in my humble opinion, it will change nothing. I mean, the results in the United States in the relations with Russia, and in case of the Ukrainian war, because we will end this war on our terms. Even more, as you remember, Mr. Trump promised to end this war during 24 hours. Time has passed. He promised it, and we are waiting for his decisions. But again, we are ready to talk with any president of the United States. Of course, now it will be Trump, and let's see.
Okay, let's give Mr. Trump a chance. I mean, he hasn't yet had all that much time to settle into the idea that he's won the election and make that call. So I don't think it's fair for the 24 hours to be ticking just yet. I think he's probably got a little bit more time. Just wanted to pick up on what you were saying, though, about what President Putin's feelings are towards Mrs. Harris, Kamala Harris. Do you think he is genuinely a little bit disappointed that she hasn't won?
I don't think so. As you noticed, it was some kind of soft smile on his face when he answered the question about U.S. elections. But if you're talking seriously, I think Mr. Trump will offer some deal to Russia before January. I think, in my humble opinion, it will be a bad deal for us, and we will reject it. And then Mr. Trump could send another huge military aid to Ukraine. I hope this scenario is possible, as well as negotiations between the United States and Russia about conditions, about peace conditions.
And is there a sense that, I mean, it sounds to me like you have poured some cold water on the idea that Mr. Trump picking up the phone, even if it's tomorrow, so let's give him a little bit more time than just 24 hours, he can't, in your opinion, therefore, is this what you're saying? Pick up the telephone, call President Putin, and say to him, let's end the war. You're saying that's not going to happen?
I don't think so. If he will call to Mr. Putin, I'm sure that he will offer some negotiations. But we are ready to talk. We are ready to negotiate peace conditions on Ukraine. But we are ready to talk under Biden administration. Let's see what will be his statement about Ukraine after election campaign, because it was just words, blah, 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 right now during the campaign, but we don't know his position, his exact position right now.
So for ending the war, in your opinion, what kind of deal could be made? What are Russia's red lines here?
You should understand that we are fighting for our security guarantees. And when we will see that our sovereignty and our state, our people, our language is secure, we will end the military phase of this special military operation. Now we are fighting against all NATO countries, and we are fighting not with Ukraine. It's not the war between Ukraine and Russia. NATO is moving military infrastructure to our border our borders closing. The West should stop doing it, and the conflict will end very soon.
North Korean troops are fighting in the war in Ukraine. Why does Russia
Who told you so?
this?
Who told you so? Who told you so? I know nothing about it.
Well, why don't you tell us, are they, let me put the question a different way then, are North Korean troops fighting in Ukraine? Because the Ukrainians say they are.
Ukrainian officials are lying every day, 24 hours a day. And I don't know, I know nothing about North Korean soldiers on the ground. But we have a great relation with North Korean government and with North Korea. It will be good if North Korea will help us, but I don't think we need it right now.
Well, were it to be proven to be correct, wouldn't that be a sign that the rest of the world could see as being a sign of desperation, perhaps?
The rest of the world, what part of the world? You have your own truth on the West. We have our own truth. We are fighting for our security guarantees, and we will get it by military, by fighting on the ground, or by negotiations. That's our only goal, to get security guarantees for our state, for our people.
Yevgeniy Popov, really appreciate your time this evening. Thank you so much. So what will Trump's victory mean for America's so-called special relationship with the United Kingdom? The British Prime Minister Keir Starmer sent his congratulations to Donald Trump, who said he looked forward to working with him in the years ahead. But Mr. Starmer's government haven't always been so complimentary about the comeback president.
Well, let's speak now to the former British ambassador to the United States, Sir Nigel Sheinwald. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us, Sir Nigel. We've heard from the British Prime Minister, who said, quote, "I know that the UK-US special relationship will continue to prosper on both sides of the Atlantic." I want to get your opinion on this. Do you think that relationship is going to remain special?
I think it'll remain close. I think that Trump actually has quite a benign view of Britain, probably a theme park view. He loves the history, and he certainly loves some of our real estate. He loves our royalty. And there are aspects of contemporary Britain which he clearly admires. So in one sense, I think that, that there's a reasonable prospect of a close relationship. It's also the case that in looking around Europe and in looking around the world, in Keir Starmer, he has someone who has a very big majority himself, and will have a long period in government ahead before the next election, another 5 years. So he'll have to deal with him. He knows that he's dealing with a stable government in the UK. They're not soulmates. This isn't a match made in heaven, but it's the job of every British Prime Minister to make the most of it. And we don't vote in American elections and have to deal with the consequences. So I think it's going to be a bumpy ride. But there is a lot that the UK is involved with internationally in areas where the US will have to continue to be active, despite that sense of Trump wanting to pull America back to some extent from its international commitments. So I always hesitate to use the word special relationship. It's quite a loaded term. It conveys a relationship which started a long time ago in a different era in the Second World War, where Britain and America together disposed of much more power than they've done for quite a long time. And Britain's relative power in particular has obviously decreased quite a bit in that time. But I do think that as you look around the world and look at America's other allies, the UK has as extensive, productive, operationally close relationship as anyone else. So it's important to look at it and important to hang on to as much of it as we can.
A little earlier in the programme, we spoke to Elon Musk's father, Eroll Musk, who was quite scathing of the British Prime Minister and said that he had put the United Kingdom on a stairway to hell. And he's obviously quite close to the inner circle of Donald Trump. And this is going to be a really big test, isn't it, for a Labour government?
The inner circle of his son, if I may say so. I mean, his son has been very critical of Keir Starmer and his government, has, picked fights with a number of people. So I need a bit more evidence to say that's coming from the centre of the Trump circle. But who knows?
Who knows? But this is, isn't it, going to be a big test because, the last Trump presidency was at a time of a Conservative government in the UK. Do you think there are going to be some trust issues, perhaps, given that they are not exactly aligned when it comes to ideology?
No, I think those are issues to get over. But look, Keir Starmer spent 2 hours with Trump in New York in September, deliberately. He knew all about Trump. Trump knew all about him. All those comments that British Labour politicians made in opposition about Trump were known at the time. I think that will, for the most part, go away and will be consigned to history. No, I quite accept, but I think the big issue is the gap in policies between the two sides. There'll have to be an attempt to try to bridge them. On trade, for example, it's going to be very, very difficult for the UK and Europe if Trump goes ahead with his plan to slap on tariffs of between 10 and 20% on European countries. There will no doubt be differentiation between them. Will the UK get affected in the same way as the other European countries? Will there be an attempt to divide and rule there? But going back to what you said, I mean, the last time round, it wasn't as though Trump dealt with us on the basis of equality and respect. He interfered in our politics. He talked a great deal about a sweetheart deal on trade between the UK and the United States, which never came about. So that never materialized. I don't think that he handled his relationship with the UK with particular care during that period, despite the fact that he felt ideologically close to Boris Johnson at the time. So we're now in a different stage in the UK. We've moved beyond the immediate post-Brexit period, which was utterly unstable here in Britain. We're in a more stable, though still difficult, period. And I think that Trump and his people will have to step back and work out whether they try to form a relationship with still the sixth biggest economy in the world and the country with, in Europe at least, among the most potent foreign policy, diplomatic and intelligence assets.
When it comes to these relationships, Britain's top diplomat, Foreign Secretary David Lammy, has described Trump as a neo-Nazi sociopath who is a profound threat to the international order. Now, he made those comments back in 2018. Should he apologise? And how does someone smooth things over with comments like that?
Well, I don't think he will apologise, and I certainly wouldn't recommend that he should. I think you should just regard those as part of the time when Trump was very, very involved in promoting, for example, a view of Brexit, which David Lammy and his party opposed, and which even Boris Johnson in the end didn't take up. I think Trump was advocating for a no deal between the UK and the European Union, a complete blowing up of the relationship between Britain and Europe. I think that would be totally against British interests, and that's another of the areas I had in mind when I was saying that I don't think he worked in the genuine Anglo-American interest during his time in his first term. Let's see what happens now. So I mean, David Lammy was there with Keir Starmer in New York when they spent 2 hours with Trump in September. He's had meetings with J.D. Vance and others on the Republican side. I think you have to look at the here and now, at someone who was an opposition politician 7 years ago and is now our Foreign Secretary. And I think you have to go from there.
Now, the current British ambassador to Washington is approaching the end of her term, and I'm just wondering, obviously you were there. more than 10 years ago now. I'm just wondering what you think. First of all, do you think there are any obvious candidates for the job? And what you think this next ambassador is going to have to get right when it comes to managing relations between London and Washington?
Well, I think our present ambassador has got a few things right. I don't think that our former Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, he had dinner with Trump at Mar-a-Lago earlier this year, and that will have come about because of our ambassador's intercession and advocacy for the need for that meeting to talk about Ukraine at a time when funding for Ukraine in Congress was blocked. And she also arranged the meeting between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump in New York in September. So she's obviously got fluent working links with the Trump organization, which is greatly to her credit. That's the job of an ambassador in a campaign. It's to have those links with the two main candidates and their teams. And I'm sure it's not easy with the Trump team and not afforded to all governments and all ambassadors. So I think there's there's been lots of talk of political appointments. I have no inside track on that and no knowledge. But I would have thought that Karen Pierce either continuing the job or having a professional diplomat in the role looks like the best, or certainly the least bad of the many options available. It's not obvious to me that a political appointment by a Labour government to a Trump administration really would make sense at this point.
And so, Nigel, you yourself served as ambassador from 2007 to 12, bridging the Bush and Biden administrations.
Bush and Obama,
Okay, that was reported to have been a smooth transition. How likely is it that this one will be?
Well, I think that you're right. I mean, Biden was obviously the vice president coming in. Bush put particular emphasis on doing things the right way. His team produced a book about it just a year or so ago. So I do, and I think Obama tried with the Trump team to do something of the same, but I don't think it was necessarily reciprocated. I don't think that they will be spiteful, vindictive, or whatever. I think they'll try and do a proper handover, but it'll depend very much on the people that Trump appoints to his transition team, and then the people that, starting later this month, he starts to appoint to the administration. And of course, amongst those last time round in 2016, beginning of 2017, were a number of seasoned professionals in their fields, General Mattis, Rex Tillerson, Steve Mnuchin, and others, who perhaps took a more conventional view of politics and transitions than might be the case with the new team arriving this time. We'll have to see if it's someone like, Elon Musk or Mr. Kennedy or others. Then they come from a different type and style of politics, if it can be called politics, and that I think might be more difficult, and they might be less interested in hearing how the previous administration did it.
So, Nigel, just looking at the numbers on Wall Street, it looks like there's a pretty upbeat feeling there. Not quite so upbeat on the European markets. And I'm just wondering if that's perhaps because tariffs are due to make a comeback. And I'm just wondering how you see the impact of tariffs as being on the British economy.
Well, I'm sure it will be damaging for the UK, damaging for the US ultimately, by the way, as well, of course, and damaging for Europe if it goes ahead. There will be retaliation, certainly by the European Union. I have no idea whether the UK would retaliate against significant tariffs if they were imposed. But this is generally a bad idea, and I think I'm in the camp of those who believe in open trade and avoiding this sort of across the board and frankly unwarranted interference with the free flow of trade.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Sir Nigel Sheinwald, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's get a quick recap of the day's main events. Donald Trump is set to become the 47th President of the United States, becoming the first president in more than a century to win a non-consecutive second term.
Election night saw him significantly exceed expectations, securing wins in key battleground areas. Well, the victory marks an extraordinary comeback for Trump, who lost the White House to Joe Biden in the 2020 election and comes after one of the most hostile campaigns in modern US history.
Well, Fox News was the first broadcaster to project that he had secured enough electoral votes to win the presidency, defeating the Democratic hopeful Kamala Harris and capping a stunning political comeback 4 years after he left the White House.
Taking to the stage a short time after the announcement, Donald Trump thanked his supporters, describing it as the greatest political movement of all time.
America has given us an unprecedented and powerful mandate. We have taken back control of the Senate. Wow, that's good. And the Senate races in Montana, Nevada, Texas, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, were all won by the MAGA movement. They helped so much. Frankly, this was, I believe, the greatest political movement of all time. There's never been anything like this in this country, and maybe beyond. And now it's going to reach a new level of importance because we're going to help our country heal. We're going to help our country heal. We have a country that needs help, and it needs help very badly. We're going to fix our borders. We're going to fix everything about our country. And we made history for a reason tonight, and the reason is going to be just that. We overcame obstacles that nobody thought possible, and it is now clear that we've achieved the most incredible political thing. Look what happened. Is this crazy? Yes, I want to thank the American people for the extraordinary honor of being elected your 47th president and your 45th president. And to every citizen, I will fight for you, for your family, and your future. Every single day, I will be fighting for you, and with every breath in my body, I will not rest until we have delivered the strong, safe, and prosperous America that our children deserve and that you deserve. Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason. And that reason was to save our country and to restore America to greatness.
Donald Trump speaking there. Well, the president-elect also discussed the Tesla CEO Elon Musk and the former independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who withdrew from the race in August. Well, both men are expected to assume roles in the White House after Donald Trump's inauguration.
Let me tell you, we have a new star. A star is born, Elon. Now he is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He came in. And he's going to help make America healthy again.
In the earlier hours, Kamala Harris, recognising the difficult circumstances, chose not to speak to her supporters at her watch party on the Howard University campus in Washington, D.C. Now, the event ended before 1 a.m. local time as the outcome became clear. She's expected to speak around 4 p.m. East Coast time. Meanwhile, Republicans also regained control of the Senate, further solidifying their influence in the federal government and adding to the impact of Trump's potential victory.
OK, so where did it all go so wrong for Kamala Harris and so right for Donald Trump? Well, let's bring in two guests. We've got Cay Johnston, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist and the author of It's Even Worse Than You Think, What the Trump Administration is Doing to America, and also The Making of Donald Trump. Two books there. We're also joined by the Republican strategist and political commentator, Scotty Nell Hughes. Thank you both very much indeed for joining us. Now, Scotty, let me turn to you first. Despite everything they said about him and everything that happened, the polls, the rhetoric, the court cases, Being a convicted felon, assassination attempt, Trump has done it again. What did he get right?
Well, he got right was his message. He understood that Americans today did not feel better than they did 4 years ago at the end of his term. And he understood that he needed to once again communicate that effectively, that he was going to be the person to fix the problems that was created by the Biden-Harris administration. And he was, regardless of all these other sort of side circuses that the Democrats continue to try to make as the headlines, it ultimately came down to when people went into the polls that they felt like their money was better off underneath Donald Trump. They felt that their national security was a lot more secure under Donald Trump, and they themselves felt like that they had a better chance for their children and their families to have the American dream under Donald Trump than they did. And it was very hard for Kamala Harris to distance herself from the administration and the policies of the last 4 years, because she was right there a part of them.
Okay, David, let's turn to you. Clearly, Donald Trump's appeal endures. We can't dispute that when you look at the numbers. He's getting that second term. Why do you think that is? And what do you think this says about modern America?
Well, Donald is a tremendous communicator. There's a reason that I call him the greatest con artist in the history of the world. And he knows how to find a message that will appeal to people, and he's very good at it. And the results yesterday show how successful he was. What's bizarre about them is that, in the words of The Economist, the American economy is the envy of the world. We've had more jobs created in the last 4 years than under every Republican president, including Donald Trump, back to 1948. The U.S. economy is just doing incredibly well, but Donald has persuaded, with the help of some news organizations that are notorious for their mendacity, that we're in a recession. He claims that all the new jobs have gone to illegals and other things that are just not supported by the facts. But, you know, people vote based on how they feel, and Donald has brilliantly captured that in this campaign. The other thing I'd point out is there was a big increase in I don't care votes. 21 million fewer people voted yesterday than voted 4 years ago. That's a significant drop from around 154 million voters to around 20 million. That is less than that.
Okay, thanks for that. Scotty, let me turn back to you and ask you, by all means, do respond to any of the comments made there, in particular that Donald Trump is a con artist there, in David's words. And this point that you were making of Americans voting with their pocketbooks, I mean, that's basically what every election boils down to, isn't it? But when you look at the numbers from the outside, you look at unemployment, you look at inflation, you look at GDP growth, none of it looks too bad. In fact, it looks quite good. I think quite a lot of countries would be quite envious. But clearly there's a massive mismatch between those numbers and perception on the streets. Why do you think that is?
Well, because I think the American people and the world should know that those numbers have been absolutely manipulated by this administration. Case in point, they used the benchmark, the starting off for all of their numbers, to be when the global economy and our state was in a pandemic. It's really easy to grow when you're at the very bottom levels. Of course, your numbers can grow. If you look at the realistic numbers of what the Biden administration has done, I think that's why the American people do not buy the fact that, you know, Biden administration, Harris tried to show that this was this great economy that we're living in. And it's absolutely not true when you're coming out of the grocery store spending $150 and carrying just 2 grocery sacks of eggs, bread, and sugar. That is one where people go, why is this administration continuing to lie to us? Not only that, but it has been so often done by this administration. They present the numbers, and then 2 months, 3 months later, they adjust them to the reality of the situation. They praise their originals, just like they did with not only the crime and safety numbers, to say that, oh, America is safer than it's ever been. And then later on, the FBI came back and went, no, your numbers, you left out the major cities in the U.S. We're not that safe. They did the same things with the job market, where we are actually very much underreported what they said. And how much percentage of those jobs are government jobs? They're not private sector jobs. They're government jobs that were created to try to beef up the numbers as well. And how many of those jobs were actually full-time jobs versus part-time? The numbers have been manipulated underneath this administration so much that the American people do not trust what is coming out of this administration. And that's why we saw demographics that normally would never look at the Republican Party, look at them yesterday and go, I need to build trust back in my American faith in the American government. And I'm going to have to do it underneath Donald Trump because I cannot trust this administration any longer.
Okay, David, how do you respond? The Biden administration, the Democrats, they cook the books. They fib about unemployment rates. They botch the numbers with regards to crime. How do you respond?
This is malarkey, to use Joe Biden's phrase. I work with the official government data all the time and have for decades. The government makes revisions. They are standard and routine. There's been nothing out of the ordinary. We track the number of part-time jobs, and we know how many people hold 2 jobs, for example. And the data is very clear. This is an incredibly robust economy. And one of the interesting things some surveys have turned up, not political polls, but surveys, is many people say that they think that they're doing badly, but everyone around them is doing well. And I think this has to do with the messaging that Donald Trump and people who support him, who have little regard for the facts, have successfully foisted onto the American public. I mean, I've literally talked with several dozen people in the last month who say the United States is in a recession. The stock market doubled in the last 4 years. That's unheard of. 15 million jobs in the last 4 years. There's exactly zero evidence that the administration has mucked with the numbers. These are done by paid professionals. And yes, there are revisions. There are always revisions to the data. That's part of what tells you there's integrity in the data. We operate a huge operation in the United States to gather this data which business relies on.
Okay, Scotty, feel free to respond. Anything you'd like to add to that before we move on to the next point?
Well, obviously, that's just not true. And the revisionist numbers were not just a couple thousand, it was a couple 100,000. And that is why the American people did what they did yesterday. Listen, Democrats, instead of sitting here and going after Donald Trump, and that's the response I was expecting today, the majority of Democrats have actually looked at each other and said, what did we do wrong? Why does the common man, the American worker, no longer feel like we're the party that they can identify with? Something that blue-collar workers have identified with the Democrats for decades. They've done a great job. And you know what? The GOP has done a horrible job with it. But Donald Trump, the man, has come in and said, no, I can actually help you. And he's done it in the past underneath his administration. People remember that. And so that is the promise that he is going to have to, and people will hold him accountable for that in these first 100 days. They're going to have to see some of the regulations that the Biden-Harris administration put in that basically strangled small business, strangled our individual solo farmers here in the country. They're going to have to see some of those just absolutely binding laws be taken away, so that once again the American economy can be a free economy again and can grow on its own organically and not be this self-inflated by the U.S. government, something that they've become used to, that unfortunately our economy's been used to for the last 4 years.
David, when your party does a post-mortem, it's probably a little bit...
Not my party. I'm not a Democrat.
Okay, when the Democrat...
Professor, I'm an investigative reporter.
Sorry, when the Democratic Party does a post-mortem and there's a bit of an analysis as to what went wrong, do you think they're going to say perhaps our campaign wasn't about real people enough? It wasn't about those real concerns that people have, affordability of food, putting food on the table, struggling families? Or do you think it will be more about wrong candidate, wrong running mate? What do you think some of the conclusions might be?
Well, I think it's going to take some time for the Democrats to analyze and figure out what went wrong here and why 21 million fewer people turned out to vote, indicating they were turned off to both of these candidates. I think the Democrats need to put a lot of time into the messaging, because all the things Scotty has been telling you about the economy, and I am well known for the care I take in the data that I present. No one ever in my career, and including White Houses, has questioned my use of data, except few people like Scotty who don't know what they're talking about. We have an incredibly strong economy, but people don't feel that way. I don't question that people don't feel that way. I think the Democrats are going to have to ask if America voted the way it did in part because of racism and sexism. Clearly, that's got to be a factor, but I don't know how much of a factor it is across the country. In urban areas where you have all tens of different people living together, Kamala Harris did much better. So I think there's some credence to that argument. And I think Harris's message was so focused on the concerns of women, particularly reproductive health care, that it turned off a lot of men. I think that's very clear. And just one last point about the economy. The decline in the wages of workers in America began with the Reagan administration's assault on unions. I've done, and other people have done, analyses that track the density of union membership and wages, and they track almost perfectly. Back in 1973, when 37% of private sector workers belonged to unions, about 80% of workers benefited. And so for anyone representing either the MAGA movement or the Republicans to lay this at the foot of Joe Biden, the most pro-union president in history, he actually walked a picket line, then that's just fact-free and absurd. But that's one of the elements of the MAGA movement that's very important. Donald Trump is a convicted felon. He's facing other criminal charges. I have documented over the last 36 years, and I was the first person to ever write about him becoming president in 1988,
All right.
36 years.
David, we're nearly at the end. We're nearly at the end of this conversation. Just want to give Scotty the last word because she's been quiet for the last couple of seconds.
Sure.
A golden age for America. That's what Donald Trump is saying. What's he got in mind in 30 seconds?
He's actually got putting America first once again, that agenda. It was unfortunately stumped probably by his own party during his first term. He's coming in here actually knowing what he's doing. He's not just a businessman. Now he knows how politics works. And I think he's going to be there to represent all Americans, including the very disillusioned, non-independent journalists that I'm on with today.
All right. Thank you very much indeed. Scotty Nell Hughes, you've had the last word. David, Cay Johnston, I'm really sorry we're out of time. Really appreciate you both taking the time to speak to us.
And just very briefly, Tom, we are hearing reports now that Kamala Harris has actually called Donald Trump to congratulate him. But thank you very much for joining us for our special coverage of the US presidential election here on Al Arabian News.
Indeed, we've navigated you through the key moments, the drama and the results that are going to shape the future of the United States and its place in the world. We hope you've enjoyed it.
And we hope we've provided you with some insightful analysis and updates from every angle.
Well, up next, it's Riz Khan. We'll be back tomorrow at the same time. Until then, from all of us, good night.